Please tell me I'm not alone. I am someone who gets pretty major FOMO, fear of missing out, especially if I've joined a new course or program, or I've found a new creator or a new book or a podcast to listen to. This can then expand to take up far too much of my time. So in today's episode of the Heart Centered Business Podcast, I wanted to share with you how I ensure I stay focused when I can feel that my FOMO is really high. This is episode number 443 of the Heart Centered Business Podcast, which means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/443. Let's dive in and focus instead of getting FOMO. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So as I said in the intro, I get FOMO really bad, especially when I join a new program. And so I just really want to be the grade A student who does all the work, goes to every single call, looks at every single resource, watches every single module. Or if I find a new creator or a new book or resource and I want to binge listen to every single episode of their podcast, or I want to make sure that I have checked out every single one of their freebies. And so my FOMO can actually show up in two different ways. Either I get into overconsumption mode. So I'm so fixated on absorbing as much as I can from that person or from that course or resource that I don't actually implement what it is that I'm learning. Or I am so caught up in my FOMO that everything else in my business sort of takes a back seat or is reduced to just doing the bare minimum because I desperately just want to be part of that program, want to be very active, or I want to be doing everything perfectly, or want to go to every single live call. Now, that side of it happening is something that showed up for one of the students in my takeoff program. And so in one of the calls, we were having a conversation because they were saying that being part of the takeoff program, because there's so many opportunities to get mentoring from me, and we have live calls together, and there are also bonus side quests and resources. They were like, I feel like I need to do absolutely every single thing. And I could actually do 40 hours a week in being a participant in the takeoff program. Inside the program, we also have the opportunity to join small group masterminds. And so this person was like, we call them pods. And this person was like, I feel like I want to be in 3 different pods because I just want to have as many conversations with people as possible. And so just like my FOMO shows up sometimes when I'm in a new program, that desire to be in consumption mode and that sense of, well, I'm spending so much time learning and listening and consuming that I'm not actually putting this into place. I'm not necessarily making progress. So I shared in that takeoff call some of the strategies that I use to focus rather than getting into that FOMO mode. But it also really reassured me that I am not the only one who gets into this state. And so I thought this was a really beautiful opportunity to bring the conversation to the podcast in case there are other people who are listening who may also get into that mode. But the second way that this can also show up for me is in that shiny object syndrome. So when I find a new mentor, or I'm listening to a new podcast, or I'm inside a new course, and there might be a certain strategy that the person mentions, or I see that they've got a lot of success on a particular platform or with a certain type of email sequence or whatever it might be. And the big risk for me is that I throw away and derail what I know already works in my strategy and what I already had planned to go and chase a shiny object just because I've seen someone else do it, or I've seen the potential for it to be quite successful. And for me, I'm very fortunate because I am more than 11 years into my business now that I know what works in my business and I know what my core strategies are. So if I'm throwing core strategies away or I'm ignoring them, I can catch it because I have the data and the evidence of what works best for me. But for those people who are early in their business journey, this overconsumption and turning into a shiny object syndrome and chasing lots and lots of different strategies can actually be difficult to spot because it looks like you're just trying a bunch of different strategies. You don't yet have one that is a proven winner. You don't yet have one that is the core strategy for you. And so you end up jumping from idea to idea, but in your brain and also from the outside, it can just look like you're giving a go to a bunch of different strategies. But in reality, the fear of missing out and the jumping from strategy to strategy is actually stopping you from completing and seeing that strategy through and doing a good job of testing and measuring and reviewing the data to see what actually works and what doesn't. So it's really critical when you find yourself in this sense of FOMO or you're in this overconsumption mode that you are able to build your skills in identifying, am I seeing my strategies through? Do I actually have capacity for something new right now? Or am I abandoning something that could very well be my breakthrough, whether it be my breakthrough offer or my breakthrough strategy, to go and chase something else that may just be exactly the same result, or it may just be worse off for my business overall. Now, this takes a bit of practice and it does take seeing things through. So before I share with you my 5 strategies for focusing when I have FOMO, one thing I will say that I encourage you to do when you, especially if you join a new course or you decide on a new strategy, is to go through and now delete or unsubscribe from or remove yourself from the content consumption that is for the other strategies. So let's say you've decided that you're going to embrace and pursue a low ticket passive income strategy. You're going to sell $29 to $49 courses that are self-study, and that is your core strategy. And you've decided, yes, that is the core strategy that I'm going to pursue. I would recommend that you unsubscribe from anyone teaching high ticket. I would recommend that you unsubscribe from listening to podcasts where that is not the prevalent model. And the reason why I recommend that is because you will end up having this kind of drawing you out into spreading yourself thin and not really nailing any of the strategies. If in your mind you're half committed to high ticket, one-to-one high connection, but in your mind you're also half committed to low ticket, disconnected marketing strategy, more broadcast marketing strategy, you'll do neither of them well. And you'll ultimately probably end up deciding that the problem is either you or your messaging or something else that's a bit vague. And then you just end up on this hamster wheel of trying to solve the problems that could just be solved by you making a commitment to what is your model moving forward. And that's not forever, it's just for now. So when people who are, really actively engaged in some of my programs or working with me, I mostly teach the high ticket and high connection marketing strategy, particularly for people in the early stages of their business, because it's the most profitable, gets the quickest feedback, it allows you to refine your marketing and your messaging the quickest, but also it allows you to make a really handsome income quite quickly. And so that's generally the strategy that I recommend for people in the early stages of business. And so because of that, if people are engaged in that, but then they make a decision that they're going to, no, you know what, I'm going to leave this for a while and instead I'm going to focus on the low ticket because I am following someone else, or I've got some really good ideas about what I could do as a low ticket, I actually say to people, well, I would recommend that you unsubscribe from me. And even if it's just for 6 months, because regardless of what strategy you choose, I'm not attached to what strategy you choose, but regardless of what it is that you choose, I want you to focus on that strategy. And so that's not one of my tips because I'm so far ahead in my business journey. I'm so far along in my business journey. I actually know what works. And so if I decide to experiment with a little low ticket strategy, I can very much pay attention to whether that low ticket strategy is distracting from my core or whether it's adding to my core results and adding to my core strategy. So now that my business is very well established, I have proven launch strategies for my high ticket programs. I have proven strategies for high connection, high conversion. I have proven strategies that I can roll out whenever I like to bring in a short-term cash injection if I want or need. Then I can very quickly identify whether experimenting with something new is an addition to my business and it's incorporating into my existing model, or if it's actually just distracting me from my core business and my core work and my core strategy. But if you aren't at that stage of business, I would highly recommend that if you find yourself in FOMO mode and you find yourself spread thin, pick a lane and unsubscribe from everything else, even if it's just temporarily. So what are my 5 strategies when I find myself in this overconsumption mode or shiny object syndrome because I've got that FOMO? Well, number 1, I increase my creation time and I decrease my consumption time. So one of the very first signs for me that I'm in FOMO mode is that I spend more time per week listening to someone else's content or consuming other people's content or, doing modules in the new course that I'm in than I do actually implementing strategy into my business. So whenever I join a new course or program, a little rule of thumb that I set for myself is that I set aside the time that I'm going to do the course, and 50% of that time is consumption, 50% of that time is creation. So if I listen to a 45-minute module, then I need to ensure I'm doing at least 45 minutes of implementing of that module to ensure that I'm not over-consuming and reducing my creation time. Now, I don't turn my creation time completely up or turn my consumption time completely down. For me, one of the biggest drivers of creation is my consumption. Listening to content, listening to courses, listening to modules gives me that ideation. It gives me that inspiration. And so I am someone who I like to start my day consuming content. So I'll listen to a podcast or I'll listen to a bit of an audio book because listening to that content actually sparks my creativity. It sparks my desire to create my own things. So I just look at my balance of time. What time am I spending each week in creation mode, like doing stuff and implementing, versus what percentage of my time each week am I spending in consumption mode? And if I find myself particularly in FOMO mode, I might make my consumption time just 20%. And my creation time 80%. So I only listen to little chunks of things and then I do a really big focus on implementation and creation. So number 1, increase creation time and reduce consumption time. Number 2 is I make sure I really cement my time purpose outside of my business. One of the risks when you're in FOMO mode is that every waking hour then gets dedicated to either being in consumption or implementing this shiny object. So if I, on average, am working 15 hours a week, and then I find myself getting into FOMO mode, what I might find is that I creep up to 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, but I almost justify it because, well, I'm implementing this new course that I've purchased, or I'm focused on getting this new strategy implemented in my business. Something that's really important to me is that new strategy doesn't equal huge workload. It doesn't equal, really overworking myself and stretching myself too thin. So when I join a new course or when I find myself getting a little bit into that FOMO, I really knuckle down and nail down exactly what I'm going to spend my time on outside of my business. David, my partner, and I do this really well already in that we go for a fairly long bushwalk most mornings. We at least walk the dogs every day. We also have regular date nights that we have with each other. We love having special days where we'll go to the movies in the middle of the day, or we'll host friends over to have a special dinner. dinner, even if it's midweek. We also love going and exploring our local area. We love playing board games. We love doing puzzles. We have Christmas movies that we want to be watching, or we have TV series that we're watching. And so we really make sure that we commit to what are we going to be doing with our time outside of the business, so that the business doesn't just expand to take up the space that's available. Other things that really help me are having my own interests outside of the business as well. So I'm really into pottery, and a trip down to the pottery studio is usually 2 to 3 hours. I also love working with a personal trainer. I work with Nez from Nezfit. I'll link to Nez in the show notes. And Nez and I work together online. But then also with the work that I do with Nez, I often have a little routine that I try and do a couple of times a week, even when I'm not working with her. And so that is something that I can make sure that I, spend some time doing. And then also, I really love just even going for a drive to a cafe somewhere, and then just working on doing a bit of journaling, or, some of that little personal development side, rather than it necessarily being business focused. So for me, just making sure I've got those boundaries in place and I'm really clear on what my intentions are to use my time outside of my business means that scope creep doesn't happen as much. Strategy number 3 is I give myself a smaller to-do list. So I want to ensure that when I am working on my business, I have a very clear purpose for the time that I'm investing. And so I'm less likely to set myself big, long to-do lists if I am really clear on what the priority is. So as much as possible, I try and stick to 3 to 4 things on my to-do list each day. That's it. If I give myself a to-do list of 10 things, then it's going to overwhelm me. And that overwhelm then creates decision fatigue as well. Because even though I've got the 10 things mapped out, every time I look at the to-do list, I'm searching through to decide, i.e. make a decision about what exactly it is that I'm going to do next. What am I going to focus on next? And so I'm creating decision fatigue, and I am also less likely to finish that list in one day, and therefore I'm going to feel like I'm behind by the end of the day. So I keep my to-do list very, very tight and small at all times, and I ensure that is maintained even when I find myself a new mentor or get excited by a new idea or join a new program. Strategy number 4 is having more time face-to-face with my clients and my audience. So something that can really distract me from being of service and showing up and doing the work I want to do in my business is being overly focused on consuming from someone else, being overly focused on doing stuff that other people do. But if I spend time with my clients, either in my takeoff program, doing calls and reviewing people's homework, or even just doing Facebook Lives with my audience, or filling my calendar with one-to-one sessions with my clients, that really helps me to stay focused. I stay focused on what my audience want from me and what I'm delivering. Because especially where that FOMO shows up as shiny object syndrome, often the shiny object that I want to create or the shiny object strategy that I want to implement is focused on an audience I don't have yet, or a product that my audience has not yet purchased. So I have no validated evidence that my audience actually wants it. And so if I spend time with my audience, it keeps me focused in that creation mode, and it keeps me focused on what my existing audience wants from me and what I want to deliver for my existing audience as well. So I try and fill my calendar so I have at least one client or one lead call each day, and then having that conversation with that person or having that group call will spark ideas that I know my audience want, that I know are aligned to my existing strategy. And I also think it's important to note here that being, inverted commas, being busy with clients can actually be catastrophized for a lot of people. So if you have something to do with clients 4 days a week, every week, a lot of people then start to worry and catastrophize. Well, what's going to happen when I get more clients? I can't do, low cost single sessions because if I fill up my calendar with those, I'm not going to be making my revenue goals that I want to make. But it's not actually a problem yet. For most people, their resistance to actually spending time with their existing clients and their audience or, having those lead conversations, their resistance is they're worried about, well, what happens if I need to do this 20 times in a week? But you haven't even booked in 3 yet. Let's actually address that problem if and when it becomes a problem. If I said to you right now, I can send you 20 hot leads every single week in your business for the next 3 months, would you really be upset by that? You might catastrophize because at the moment, the time that you spend with each lead is like an hour and a half. But there are strategies we can put in place to ensure that we give that time some better boundaries and the time that you spend with each lead is reduced. And in fact, the more lead conversations you have, the better skilled and quicker you'll get at identifying exactly what each lead needs from you and pitching your product or service to meet that need, specifically in the language that's going to work for them. So for a lot of people, their resistance to filling their calendar is actually not a real problem at this point in time. And it is a problem that if it does become a thing for you, we can absolutely solve. So I love to have lots and lots of face-to-face time with my clients and audience because it reminds me that my FOMO is driven by a desire to go and reach people who may not actually want to work with me. My desire to go and talk to strangers on the internet. But strangers on the internet are 1,000% less likely to buy something from me. And also, they are the people who aren't necessarily aligned with the type of work that I want to do. They're not necessarily the niche that I want to work with. And so I find that if I spend more time face-to-face with my clients, I just stay focused on what my strategy is and the people that I want to serve. And it helps to really reduce that fear, that FOMO, that fear of missing out, and helps me to focus. And then the final strategy that I use to focus when I get myself into FOMO mode is that I co-work on implementation. So in a co-working session, I might reach out to a couple of biz besties and say, hey, I've got a lot of stuff that I want to implement at the moment. Or I'll say, I've got a new course that I want to implement, and so I need to do some implementation time. Or if I'm in a course or program, I might even just reach out to other people in that course and say, hey, I want to make sure I'm not just learning here, I'm actually implementing. Does anyone want to co-work with me on the implementation time? So we get together on a Zoom call. We each set out what our action is going to be for that call, and then we turn our microphones to silent and get on with doing it. For me, being neurodivergent, this works particularly well because it's body doubling. It's being present with someone else in the room. So we're sort of tuning into each other's energy, and it keeps me focused, and it keeps me working on what I intended to work on, and it creates that sense of accountability. So co-working for me is also a really strong strategy to ensure that I am focused when I get myself into FOMO mode. If this is something that you struggle with and you in particular feel like you're jumping from strategy to strategy, one of the most powerful tools or templates that I have is actually one of my freebies. It's my quarterly plan on a page. I use this quarterly plan on a page every single quarter in my business, and I have it on my desk in front of me every single day. That way, if I do find myself jumping into new ideas or shiny objects, I can very quickly see if I've got off track from what I had intended and be intentional about that change of direction or get back to what I'd planned. I'll make sure I have the link to the quarterly planning template over with the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/443. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine.